When you rewire your identity, you're engaging what we call neuroplasticity. This is your brain's ability to form new neural pathways. And by consistently reinforcing a new identity, you're actually training your brain to support that specific version of you. So incredible. So when you think about, let's just go back to Identity Shifts 101, okay? And the key to focus on is being rather than doing. Being rather than doing. For example, instead of saying, I want to exercise more, right? I want to exercise more. Come on, this is so great. Instead, you could say, I am a healthy, active person. Welcome to the ReLaunch podcast. I'm your host, Hilary DeCesare, and I am here to help you navigate life's transitions, rediscover your purpose, and take your business and life to the next level, creating and relaunching into a rich life. Today, we're diving into a topic that hits close to home for so many of us. New Year's resolutions. And whether you are listening to this at the beginning of the year, Q2, Q3, Q4, it's all about what are you trying to create in the next 12 months. But I want to throw this out to you. Why do New Year's resolutions or a lot of goal settings completely fail? And more importantly, how can we approach lasting change by focusing on resetting and rewiring our identity? Did you know that 80% of resolutions are abandoned by February? For those of you that join the gym at the very beginning of the year, renew your membership, and then all of a sudden you go in there and there's tons of people. Well, within about the third to fourth week, it has really slimmed out. Well, here's the good news. When you think about failing at your New Year's resolutions, I want to say it's not your fault. It's actually how we are putting it towards and linking it to your identity. And this episode is all about addressing the root cause and giving you tools to relaunch your year, your next 12 months. And this will ultimately relaunch your goals and specifically you. So let's talk about the resolution problem. Let's start by tackling the big question. Again, why do our resolutions fail? Well, think about it. You're setting these ambitious goals fueled by fresh start of wherever you're going to do it. Like, oh, I'm so excited. It's mid-year, beginning of the year. But all of a sudden, within weeks, that motivation starts to just decline. Or as we call it, relaunches happen. Life happens. And before you know it, those goals start to drift away. They feel like they're even further out there. They're just so out of reach. And the problem isn't the goals themselves, is that we're actually approaching them from the wrong angle. Here's a quick analogy. Imagine trying to build a house and your foundation is a little shaky. Let's say it's like sand. It doesn't matter how big the house is, how grandiose. If the foundation, or even how small the house is, if the foundation can't support it, the house will ultimately come down. Well, resolutions are like that. They're just like the house. And your identity, if you think about it, your identity, who you are, your I am statements, that's your foundation. So if your goals don't align with who you believe you are at the core, they're never going to stick. And I want you to hear that. Here's where we're going to get a little neuroscience tie-in. Science is 100% supportive on what we're talking about. Our brains are wired for consistency. If you think about what your subconscious brain is there to do, two main things: keep you safe and keep you familiar. So if your identity doesn't align with your goals, your brain is actually going to resist all change. So I'm sure a lot of you have gone up and you're kind of cruising along, you're in your comfort zone, and you start to push. God, I really want to have another great quarter. I really want, and you fill in the blank. And all of a sudden you're like, it just doesn't happen. You get to that certain point with revenue and you can't get above it. You get to that certain point where you're like, you're on X amount of stages, you've done X amount of negotiations, and nothing more comes. Well, this is where resistance comes in. This is where your subconscious is doing its job. It wants you to stay in the comfort zone, it wants you to stay safe and familiar. So, this is actually something that we can tie to what we call the reticular activating system, otherwise known as the RAS. It's that part of the brain that filters information to reinforce what you actually believe to be true about yourself. I want to let you know that your identity is your reality, and your identity believes that whatever you think, believe is 100% true. So if you believe I'm not that disciplined, then your RAS, your reticular activating system, is going to seek evidence out in the real world to prove that to be true. So even if you set these incredibly ambitious resolutions and your identity is one that hasn't had that before, it's not possible. Or you got money stories, right? Like, oh, I've never been able to crack over 500, over a million, over, 8 figures, 9 figures, whatever it is, you're going to feel that resistance. So let's talk in this next part about resetting for success. How do you do it? So here's where the concept of resetting comes in. When you think about it, resetting isn't about starting over from scratch. Think about relaunch. Relaunch is not like completely wiping everything out. It's about recalibrating, realigning your goals with who you are and who you want to become, future identity. And at the relaunch, we use the concept of a heart reset, because at the core, there is something that I created called 3HQ framework. And 3HQ is really about connecting your head with your heart and that higher self, the highest self, which is the best version of you. And when your head and your heart aren't working together, you can't get to that highest self. And that's where you create alignment. So, really think about this. Without the connection, it's like driving a car with the GPS off. You're moving, but you're not necessarily going in the right direction, right? It might be you're trying to get somewhere, but you never been there before. So let's just do a quick exercise that will kind of take this all home. Take a moment right now. Ask yourself this. What's one goal? What's one goal that doesn't truly align with your values or what you want this year? Like, you put it down there, it sounds good. Maybe it's somebody else's goal that you heard and you're like, "Hey, I think I'm going to try that one too. It sounded good." But here's the thing. How does it feel? How does it feel? It may, from a head perspective, from a thought perspective, sound good, but does it really resonate with you? I'm going to give you a little insight into a client I had. And the client was about to sell his company for 250 million. And his big thing was, this is what I've always wanted. This is what I've always thought I wanted. And when I do this, he was going to buy a boat, sail around the world. Well, he had now a wife and he had a young kid, and the marriage wasn't going so well. And the young child really didn't have a relationship with him. And smart enough, as we got into working together, he said, "You know what? if I do this, I could potentially end up divorced, not having a relationship with my child. And I said, well, what was the real core of why you wanted in the first place to get a boat? And there was a story about when he was young and his dad had a best friend, and a couple had gone and sailed the world. And it always seemed like a really cool thing. And I said, well, what happened to that couple? And he said, well, it's funny. They ended up like going somewhere, and my dad and my mom never really even heard from them again. And it ended up that eventually, there was no contact at all. And he's like, I'm not even that crazy about the water. And so it was completely out of alignment. So when you think about what success would feel like in this next 12-month period, what would that really be? What are the wins? What are you really going for? What sets you, and I always say like fire in the belly, that like, butterfly moments, what would those be? Because that feeling we need to think of as your North Star, as your compass to get there. All right. So when you think about, and I'd like to give you some tips right now. When you think about this, I want you to think about reassess your goals. Look at them again. And if you don't have any, great. Start with what I'm talking about. See if they really are meaningful for you. Or are they somebody else's story? Somebody else like thought this would be a good idea. Really make sure that they map to truly you. And then I want you to really break them down instead of aiming for this like, I want to hit every star out there in the universe. I want you to really focus on on the few that are meaningful, on a few that if you had it happen in the next 12 months, that would be like the biggest win that you've ever had in your career, in your personal life. And remember, you can have goals in your personal life, goals in your professional life, but you've got to ask yourself, like really intuitively, I call it, if you're a female, you're calling on your wise woman. If you're a guy, you're calling on your wise wizard. What do you really want? Not somebody else, not what your parents always thought for you, but what do you really want? It's now time to think about your subconscious and what has been familiar and safe and say, do I really want to stay familiar and safe? And then I need you, as my book, Relaunch, Spark Your Heart to Ignite Your Life. I talk about the pause principle. Give yourself time to reflect. And then once you have time to reflect, this is not like a one and done process, everyone. You have to be checking in. Check in with yourself. Because when you really check in, I've had people after 2, 3 weeks say, you know what, Hilary, this isn't what I really want. And we modify. And guess what? That's okay. In fact, high five. You're learning more about you and what you ultimately want. So now let's move into rewiring your identity for lasting change. So we've talked about relaunching, and resetting is so incredible powerful. But lasting change actually requires rewiring your identity. So think of your identity as the lens through which you view yourself. It's your camera, and it's how you see the world. And if the lens is dirty, if the lens is, maybe you need to go see, the optometrist, you need to get a new prescription. We need to make sure it's clear. Otherwise, you're not going to see the path clearly. So I want to, me, I like to tie it into neuroscience. When you rewire your identity, you're engaging what we call neuroplasticity. This is your brain's ability to form new neural pathways. And by consistently reinforcing a new identity, you're actually training your brain to support that specific version of you. So incredible. So when you think about, let's just go back to Identity Shifts 101, okay? And the key to focus on is being rather than doing. Being rather than doing. For example, instead of saying, I want to exercise more, right? I want to exercise more. Come on. This is so great. Instead, you could say, I am a healthy, active person. I am a healthy, active person. I love to engage where I get my heartbeat up, where I'm building additional strength. This subtle shift actually redefines your actions as an expression of who you are. So when you think about visualizations, I want you to actually, either close your eyes or do this, and just hear it. But I want you to really think about the idea around thinking and seeing and having all of this come together for you. And when you visualize, it lights up all areas of your brain. All right. So I want you to think about picturing your future. And if you're driving, just like as you're just kind of moving forward with the highway, you're just like, what do you really want? Because your brain doesn't know the difference. Your subconscious doesn't know the difference between what's true on the outside and what you're thinking. So think about what you're doing. Think about that's very head. Think about how you feel, very heart. And this primes your brain for change. Then we increase and we add in affirmations. And what is an affirmation? Affirmation affirms what you're going for. That's what that is. And this is where you hear often about these powerful statements that reinforce your new identity. For example, I am someone who, and then we would say, who wants to be physically healthy, who wants to have better strength. I am already increasing my overall body strength. I am improving. And then you put in what you are looking at, thinking, seeing, putting all the different senses in there, right? And then you go into the third part of this after visualizing, after really infusing it with the affirmations, and you're like hearing yourself talk through it. By the way, your subconscious number one voice it loves is your own. Remember that it's your own voice. And then last but not least, and I talk about this all the time, are these pop the champagne moments, whether it's literal or figuratively, it's this champagne celebrations, right? Because every small step that you do, everything you do towards what you're going for, you must be celebrating because it releases dopamine. It activates that RAS we were talking about that's looking for more of that. So it's a way to actually circumnavigate the things that are going on. The fact that your subconscious wants to keep you safe and familiar, and all of a sudden you're telling your RAS, give me more of that. Let me see more of that. And that's when you celebrate. Yes, even the smallest things, you can be like, yes, that has something to do with it. Okay, so now as we are moving into the next part of this, I want you to think of creating a plan that will actually stick. And now that you have had this opportunity to reset, rewire, I want you to create kind of this plan that you're going to follow, that you're going to believe in, that you're going to create the identity for so that you can get to the next level. But you have to do something that is going to be right for you, that actually does stick. Because if it doesn't feel right, you're not going to do it. So the key here is to ditch the all or nothing mentality. It didn't work. I'm done, right? You can't do that. What we have to do is have flexibility and appreciate progress. And I want you to be thinking, I want you to actually look at flexibility and your progress as your best friends. Like, oh my God, that's so cool. I just, you know what? I'm kind of flowing. I'm having flexibility in what I'm doing. So cool. And every time you have progress, it's like right on. And you can even name these things. You can even name, like, when you're doing progress, you're like, Jill, high five. This is so great. But I want you to keep starting small. I call them micro pops. And again, when we're talking identity, don't try to create multiple identities at one time. Choose one identity for that goal. All right. And then I want you to break what you're trying to do in these micro pops, like small little steps around, like, what the person that would have that goal, what would the identity be? And I often find people that are millionaires in the making, and they really want to become an impact millionaire, a seven figure. And I'll say, all right, from where you are right now, what are the characteristics? What are the values? What are the habits that that identity would need to have of your future self? And that's where we start. We start small. We start working on those every single day. And then you have to have a community. You have to have accountability, because there is nobody, even like when you think about it, we all, Olympic athletes need coaches. I mean, I think about myself, and I've got three insanely great coaches pushing me along, making sure that I continue to operate at that highest level. And that becomes, how many times have I heard these amazing business people, and I'll say, do you have a coach? And they're like, oh, I've been thinking about it. You are that athlete. You are the Olympic athlete in your business, in your personal life. Make sure that you have someone that is supporting and pushing you. Okay. So, this is why, when you think about it, that you don't ever want to be like holding these things in, not sharing them with people, but you share them with the right people, because there's a lot of toxic people around you that are going to be like non-supportive, and that's not what we want. Okay. So, I want to say this. What's the takeaway from today? All right. Resolutions fail because they target behavior, not identity. And think about that when you're starting to reset and rewire. Don't just go about it as if you're just looking at it, yeah, I got to do this. And I can't tell you how many people are like, yeah, I'm thinking about my goals. I didn't write them down. Ugh, you're not just setting goals. You're actually looking to transform your identity, to break free of that comfort zone and look at the person that you are creating yourself into being. And this isn't about keeping a resolution, like, I'm going to keep this It's about relaunching into the highest self, into that best version of you. And one small step, one small micro pop at a time. So here's what I want you to be thinking about. If you're ready and you're like, Hilary, this all sounds really good. I want to relaunch. And today is the day I'm going to start this process. I want you to think about joining up on a program that I created. It's probably one that I'm the most excited about, because it's called Flip Your World in 40 Days. Inner strength, outer success. That's what I'm talking about. Wrapping ancient wisdom, neuroscience, kind of taking personal development and tweaking the heck out of it to match today's lifestyle. That's what we have created. And you can go to therelaunch.com. You can check it out there. You can check it out in the show notes. We've linked it right there. And don't forget, if you like what you're hearing and where we're going as we're closing in on 300 episodes, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. I want you to get access to every single one of our episodes. So this is your time. This is, as I always say, go time. So as we wrap up, live now, love now, relaunch now, and flip your world in 40 days. Take care, and I will see you again next week.